The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I am a core alignment coach and a diversity educator. If you're interested in seeing some of the programs and courses I offer coaching or training in, you can visit my website, which is called knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. Thank you for being here. I am really very grateful that we have a guest today who has personal, direct, professional experience in the world that I really value and appreciate. His name is Littleton Tazewell, and we can call him Lit. So if you would come on the screen with me, I would rather have you be a part of me giving people an idea of your background with you and from you rather than reading it, which I typically do. And
Thank you,
I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to share that the name of this show is titled Dismantling the Heart of Foreign Service. And I really was one of the people who, when I heard about the elimination of USAID, United States Agency for International Development, and aid, I, like many people who've ever served in any capacity, much less the recipients of any service, just felt the shockwave of how startling and upsetting and all the potential ramifications that could come from that cut. So that's what the topic is, but now let's go back to your professional background, because you've been like a key leader and you've served in many countries in many different capacities in international service. So I wanted to ask if you could start from I know you the Peace Corps Network, and reading a little brief biography. After that you got a law degree, and can you tell us how you got into the Foreign Service and into USAID work?
Well, first of all, Bahia, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and to your audience. It is a real privilege and an honor to be here with you today. I want to just make one slight correction. I wanted the title to be Dismantling the Heart of U.S. Foreign Assistance. And the reason I thought that was an apt title is, USAID was definitely the preeminent foreign assistance agency for the U.S. government, but it wasn't the only one by any stretch of the imagination. But I hope over the course of the hour we'll have an opportunity to explore why I feel that the heart is a good metaphor for the role it played in our foreign policy and in our presence in the world. But in any case, you asked how I got involved with USAID, and as you indicated, I was a Peace Corps volunteer some time ago, back in the early 1980s, which is how you and I met, of course, the network somewhat recently in the last 5 years. I had the privilege to serve in Nepal in the early 1980s, truly developing country at that time, still a developing country, but at that time, still a monarchy, still a Hindu kingdom, very vastly different from anything most people in the United States would have the opportunity to experience. And for me, it was truly an incredible opportunity. And I had one of those charmed Peace Corps experiences where things, generally speaking, went pretty well. There were arduous times, there were challenges, but on balance, I finished up with a real belief in what Peace Corps stood for, what our country, what the United States stood for by sending out people to countries like Nepal to lend a helping hand. I was a teacher, an English teacher in a small village school. But in any case, at the end of my 2 years of service, I came back to the United States, and I decided that I wanted to pursue a law degree. And part of my motivation there is having an undergraduate degree in theater arts stage management, which served me well in many instances as both a volunteer and then, believe it or not, later in my career, both as an attorney in the private sector and then later with USAID. But that undergraduate degree left a little bit in my heart to be desired from the standpoint of having experienced a rigorous education opportunity. And it was really more a continuation of what I really enjoyed earlier in my life. I'd been heavily involved in theater in high school and such. In any case, I ended up choosing to go to law school. And I went to school at William & Mary, and very lucky to be there, a state-supported school, very high credentials and credibility. During my first year, I ended up having an opportunity the summer after my first year to go back to Nepal, where I had served, and work for USAID in their contracts office in the procurement division. And in a large measure, it was serendipitous. I found out that there was an attorney serving as a contracting officer in Nepal, and I wrote him a letter and said, "What does an attorney do for USAID and procurement?" And he said, "Well, if you're really interested, why don't you come out and spend the summer with me? I could use somebody who speaks Nepali and has a pretty good understanding of the country." So I did. Great. While there, I had the opportunity to meet a really fine individual by the name of Pat Ramsey. She was the regional legal advisor for USAID, supporting Nepal and several other countries, thus the regional. And I learned about her job just over a lunch one day, and understood for the first time how our foreign assistance operates in this very interesting process of U.S. taxpayers' money being appropriated by Congress and then implemented by an administration. And within that framework, when you're spending U.S. taxpayer monies, there's a whole lot of legal restrictions and policies and complexities to do it so that we're consistent with the expectations of both the administration and really the American public. And the main role for ensuring compliance with all those requirements was the regional legal advisor, which is a foreign service attorney with the U.S. government. And I thought, wow, that sounds like an amazing job. So how do I get this job? I asked, and I was told that, well, the key way to getting the job, this is back in the, in the late 80s, actually, early 90s, was go get yourself out of law school, do real well, and get a job with a law firm either in New York, Boston, Northeast, or maybe DC, a high-level corporate law firm where you can do transactional law. And I'm like, what? What does that have to do with development? Well, she was right at the end of the day. The idea behind that kind of an experience was to really develop the professional skills of the attorney, of the individual, and a level of sophistication for basically being a corporate lawyer, transactional lawyer, in another country, dealing with all sorts of different partners, both government and private sector and non-governmental organization partners, at a level of sophistication and independence. And that was really the key. They really only hired attorneys with at least 3 to 4 years of a fairly high level of responsibility from the private sector. So I did that, all well and good. And at the end of my 4 years, duly applied to USAID. And of course, as one would expect with that kind of diligence, I was rejected summarily. And at that point, I was a little perplexed. Things were changing significantly politically in the U.S. This was right at the end of the Cold War. There was a peace dividend that I really was chagrin to find out was actually resulting in significant cuts to USAID, and that was right when I was trying to apply. Interested in potentially working overseas again, potentially working in this area of development, but now married and with 2 small children. We decided, because my wife had never been to a developing country, to go and spend a little bit of time, if you will, a 6-month sabbatical in Ecuador. This is a long story to get you to the Foreign Service, but ended up going to Ecuador. That 6 months turned into 4 years, course of which I ended up teaching international trade law at the local law school. I was of counsel with a small firm. And most importantly, I work with a small local non-governmental organizations doing health care in the Amazon region. And it was through that I ended up meeting the wife of the USAID mission director. And through her and him, he ultimately encouraged me to reapply to USAID because he felt I had the type of dedication, skill set, that the agency was really looking for. And as it turns out, they were beginning to rehire. I applied. It was about a year before I actually heard back. And finally, ultimately 10 years after I had initially set as a goal to join the Foreign Service as an attorney, a Foreign Service attorney, I got the offer, and that was a real positive day, to say the least. So sorry for the long-winded background.
Oh no, that's stamina for you. 10 years.
But the key lesson there's a couple of lessons. One is it's probably healthy to let go of things that you're just dying to get and let it kind of percolate. And if it's right for you, it's probably likely going to come back. There's a lot of thinking in that space. But more importantly, the actual practical experiences of going out and spending some time with my family in a developing country set me apart from a lot of other potential candidates who, one of the risks of having highly experienced attorneys with their families be sent overseas and realize, this is a little tough for us. And maybe this is not
a really great point.
A lot of investment of money. But I also had that opportunity to work with a local non-governmental organization that ultimately I helped it receive a sub-grant from USAID. And I got to see what it's like from that angle, dealing with all of this myriad of law and policy and regulation and the complexities associated with it, and the challenges to meet the accountability requirements when it came to our foreign assistance. So that really provided a foundation for what really turned out to be a major part of my career working at USAID.
I mean, boy, you are the perfect person to talk to about this topic. But before I ask you more about what you did exactly, and I want people to hear all the different places, all the different locations you served, because that will give any listener or viewer a concept of kind of the vastness of situations you've been in. Just authenticates it more. So can you say more? I was reading I was looking up information about how can we measure the impact of this massive loss of assistance and the soft power, but for the United States, for one thing, which to me is not as painful as the actually starving children who used to get food through this program. So I wanted to hear you. Can you describe more, like, what was the assistance in why was it the heart? Why was it the heart of foreign assistance?
First off, USAID, U.S. foreign assistance, there's sort of two components to it. One component is concentrated on what's called humanitarian assistance. It's as you said, it's feeding children during times of close to famine or drought or other emergency where the food distribution system has collapsed, or there's been a severe impact on the agricultural production of a country, or some other cataclysmic set of circumstances, political unrest, war. That humanitarian response that goes in and is there to dig people out of horrific earthquakes or responses to hurricanes. People may remember back when Haiti was hit with a horrific earthquake and literally hundreds of thousands of people died. Well, the United States would respond. The leadership of its response was always USAID. The military played a very important role, but it was USAID that was the coordination. That was the center of making it work. It was our DART teams, our disaster assistance response teams that would go out to a country and do the assessment. They had the networks already in place to be able to mobilize the humanitarian assistance to respond to these dreadful things. And there's always been a very deep well of empathy on the part of the American public when there are huge disasters in other countries, and a desire to respond. Often people respond through Red Cross, through the religious institutions, Catholic Relief Services, many, many different entities. USAID filled that critical role of coordination amongst all the various actors, and particularly the other U.S. governmental actors. That's the humanitarian response aspect of our foreign assistance. The other aspect is on development assistance, and that is really the funds, much, much less in many ways, but addressing issues such as poverty, health concerns, education, environmental concerns, where countries are, for whatever reason, not able to wrestle with the challenges within their own country adequately. And our assistance comes in to support the efforts of those countries to develop their educational system, to improve their economic context so that businesses can be successful, to address environmental concerns, particularly around, we did work across a whole range of environmental issues, but the impact of climate change, but also impact of different species facing potential extinction due to overfishing, or there's so many different aspects where we would complement the work of the government and non-governmental organizations in the countries with technical assistance to strengthen their capacity to do so. Same thing in the education context. And it's in that development area that the notion behind it is the stronger the countries are, the better prepared they're going to be able to serve their populations in the manner that I think most governments, we would hope, are doing so, creating conditions for people to be successful, for people to grow, for people to be healthy, for people to be educated. But also it really fostered incredibly positive relationships with the countries that we worked in, and developed, I think, a cadre of individuals that have deep, deep knowledge of those countries. And I think that's one of the greatest things that we lost, is both the relationship, this perception of the United States as being a helping hand, a country that would lend some of its incredible wealth and technological advanced resources to the betterment of other countries. The outcome, of course, was often they would look to U.S. for both products and people as they were beginning to grow into those areas that they're going in. It's definitely served our interest, and I think it's always served our interest to be engaged in that kind of way. And to me, that is the tragedy of losing that center point, that heart of what it is that our country has done for the last 65 plus years, because 65 years or 62 years is the age of USAID as of right now. But prior to the existence of USAID, we engaged in this type of work, and it was largely what rebuilt Europe after World War II under the Marshall Plan, and a lot of what USAID ultimately came into a single agency was built on that foundation of the Marshall Plan. And again, the goodwill that has engendered in the world around our presence in the world is extraordinary. Now, I also want to note that we did not always get it right. There are many instances that one can point to where, for whatever reason, and there are plenty of good reasons, that the assistance that was provided was not did not achieve the results that were intended. Some of it, those resources went to the wrong people. There are many, many instances, but the vast majority, vast majority, I think most would agree, had very positive impacts, both in the context of development and humanitarian interventions, but also in our relationship around the world.
That's good to hear from your experience, that you can say confidently that the vast majority was positive, and it's really appreciate, any admissions of our mistakes, that USAID, like any agency, can make mistakes and have flaws.
One thing I would highlight in that regard is, I think, in part because our foreign assistance is spending U.S. taxpayers' money in other countries to the betterment of non-citizens, the level of scrutiny on those dollars was exceedingly high. And the requirements associated with ensuring that those funds were spent consistent with the expectations, with the outcomes that were expected, made the process pretty bureaucratic, I will be honest with you, but also very, very accountable. And all of our programs were regularly audited. There was obviously thresholds, because you didn't audit a $500 program or a $5,000 program, but there were, at certain levels, they were required to be audited by external audit firms, and the reports from those audit firms, if there were any problems with funds that were misused, misappropriated, those funds would be collected where they could be collected. And we've shut down entities that were not able to manage the funds consistent with our expectations. We were a difficult partner in that regard, which to some degree explains, was one of the allegations that's thrown at the agency frequently, is why do we use these American international entities to implement our program? Well, in part because they were able to manage manage the funds in a manner that was consistent with our expectations. The integrity that they could bring to the table was at a level that would satisfy the auditors and satisfy our congressional handlers, and that was a very big part of it. My particular background, my particular interest, and largely from what I highlighted, the experience that I brought to the agency, was trying to move as much of our resources directly through local organizations. And a little bit of a side story there. As I indicated, I started out with the agency as an attorney, as a field attorney, a regional legal advisor. And my first posting was in Central America. I was in Guatemala, and I covered both Guatemala, Honduras, and Panama. And during that time, I got to know the types of programs that we were managing in Central America and Latin America, very different from what we do in Africa. Spent 3 years there before my second tour, which was in Kazakhstan, and this was in the early years of our battles in Afghanistan, and we were investing in the other stands of the region: Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. And I was a regional advisor for all those 5 countries. Very interesting time, and it was also towards the end of the period of the color revolutions, and Kyrgyzstan went through one of those revolutions, and there's a lot of suspicion about our foreign assistance potentially being there to support the overthrow of governments. None of it true, but it was definitely what was perceived by some of the government counterparts. I spent a lot of time with prosecutors there. They were investigating our programs. They never came up with anything other than the fact that the programs were doing really great work. During that period of time, I'll just highlight the Kazakhs actually liked our economic growth programs, where we were basically trying to support individuals in their developing their entrepreneurial skills. It was so successful that when our funding came to a conclusion, the Kazakh government gave the United States government, through USAID, additional money to keep the programming going. What does that say about it? Well, it was deeply appreciated by the Kazakh government. Our relationship with the Kazakh government, all the governments in the stands, was quite positive, in spite of some of the dynamics that were at play right then, during our conflict in Afghanistan. In any case, I was also a regional legal advisor there as well. But after I finished up my time in Kazakhstan, I had the opportunity to move into a senior management role. I became the mission director in Panama. And I went to Panama, and we had a very tiny little mission there because pretty much Panama was at the cusp of graduating, no longer needing foreign assistance. And our work was primarily around working with the Panama Canal Authority in managing the watershed that served the canal to ensure that there was sufficient water for the canal to operate. And it was obviously in our interest, but it was in the interest of the Panamanians. And that was an interesting piece of work. While there, we were successful. We, the mission, the embassy, the ambassador, and I made an appeal for funding through Congress that was allocated to the Department of Defense to have some engagement in the Darien province, the province where we currently have seen over the last couple of years a lot of the immigrants coming across from Venezuela and from Colombia. Also, a lot of drugs coming through there. At the time, drugs were just beginning to start coming through there. They used to have the fast boats coming across, which now are getting destroyed. They were coming along the littoral parts of Panama and transshipping the drugs. And the indigenous population, the youth of the indigenous population in the Darien province, were being hired by the narco traffickers to help transmit. They were basically just loading and unloading boats and then carrying it out to the road and such. The idea was if we could get some funding, we might be able to engage with the indigenous group there and youth programming and their schools to encourage them not to get involved with the narco traffickers. And certainly the leadership within the indigenous community really wanted us to be working in this space, but we didn't have any money allocated for Panama in education. So we asked the Department of Defense, and they said, sure, let's do it. And we did it. We had a pretty incredible program there, working at an agricultural school, working with the indigenous people on youth programming, improving the outreach to the youth. In that work, one of the things that I felt very strongly about, as well as the ambassadors, we really wanted to work directly with local organizations, bypassing the traditional, third-party implementer and such. That was a real struggle, because the agency at that time was really not well set up to work with for our acquisition and assistance, our contracting authorities, and our processes to be able to be open to local entities was really difficult. In any case, it took a long time, and I actually got crosswise with the ambassador because it took longer than they wanted. She wanted things to happen tomorrow. In any case, I ended up leaving Panama early, large measure, because I think I lost the confidence of the ambassador. Came back to Washington, went back to the General Counsel's office, and was able at the beginning of the Obama administration to come in and work on procurement reform to basically alter our systems to make it a little bit easier to work directly with local organizations. Incredibly complex set of institutional, policy, regulatory, some even statutory changes to enable us to do that. And spent the next 2 years doing that. Fabulous work with some incredible other attorneys and people in the policy shop and across all the various regional bureaus of the agency. Had a real impact on our operational capabilities in working with local organizations. Fabulous time. From there, I went back out in a senior role, and I was the deputy mission director for regional programs in South Africa, where in South Africa in particular, but in the countries that we served from that mission, there were a number of local entities, particularly South African entities, that really had a high capability of managing our resources in a manner that was accountable and consistent with our needs from an integrity accountability standpoint. So I was able to bring that experience I had in the General Counsel's office into that space and support the team in expanding our work with local organizations. At the same time, the State Department and its work in HIV and AIDS under PEPFAR and you may remember Ambassador Burks, she was adamant to that we put more money through local organizations as well, because this is a fundamental concept. We've been wanting to do this for a long time. So some would say that, now is the first time we've really thought about it. It's not the case at all. In any case, wonderful 4 years there.
Can you clarify like why that's so important?
Because it's about ownership. It's about overhead. It's about the amount of the resources that are actually getting down to the operational ground level work and the beneficiaries at that ground level. If you are working through a U.S. entity, they're likely to have a significant back office back in Washington, which is expensive, and the overhead associated with it is significant. And that has been one of the big complaints that has been thrown at the agency for a long, long time, is look at the overheads that are charged. Not really any different from the overheads charged to the Department of Defense or Department of State or anybody else. But because it's foreign assistance and the money is intended to benefit folks in poor countries, it seems to hurt more. And it does. And ultimately, the other piece of it is, I think there's fair criticism about organizations not from the country itself coming in and doing a project for a period of time that the actual long-term impact is less than if you're having a local entity that's invested in the long-term interest of the country implementing a similar type of project.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, like more to use kind of my lingo. I'm imagining it was, and you correct me if I'm wrong, this might be my idealistic view, that the more closely you worked with local entities, the more their voices were included in the planning, and like the Peace Corps, like it reduced the amount of we're going to come and tell you this great program and you're going to do it, to what do you want, what do you need, how can we empower that? Am I being idealistic?
I think you hit right on it, and as you know, Peace Corps volunteers are the loudest critics of USAID traditionally and historically, and I was certainly out there in front in that regard. And one of the things I did as a senior leader is I made sure that I was meeting with Peace Corps volunteers on a fairly regular basis, because I felt they could talk to us candidly about how we were being perceived in the communities, what they thought was going on, and perhaps occasionally correct perspectives when they may not have understood what was kind of behind the curtain, so to speak, and have developed some wonderful relationships and friendships in that regard. Oops, sorry about that. My phone just talked to me. In any case, from South Africa, I ended up, my next posting was in Malawi, small country in sort of South Central Africa, nestled in between Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zambia, and served as a mission director there for 4 years. And that was my last official tour of duty as a foreign service officer. Incredible job, incredible team there, a country that is desperately poor, regularly is ranked in the 5 poorest countries in the world, landlocked, very few mineral resources that had been exploited up to that point in time. Primary export, tobacco, not a great export these days. Incredible level of malnutrition in the kids, a large population. 40% of the children were stunted, which basically resulted in adults that didn't have a whole lot of capacity other than growing maize, growing corn. It was a tough country, but a beautiful country. It's also known as the warm heart of Africa. Perhaps that's where I've got my affiliate, my feeling about hearts and how important they are, and wonderful people, truly wonderful people. And I can talk a little bit more about the programming we had that all come to a screaming halt in January and February. But it was there that we spent an enormous amount of effort to try to work more through local organizations. But I will tell you, it is not an easy thing at all. One of the first things I noted when I arrived is we were in the midst of U.S. Department of Treasury doing a collection action against the CCIP, which is the Presbyterian Church organization, had been doing health programming and had not met their audit requirements. And we were coming in and, just like with anybody else, collection agents were calling them regularly. Awkward, very, very awkward. So my sensitivity around when and how you work with local organizations, the importance of capacity strengthening with local organizations, having an on-the-ground presence to make sure that there's eyes on, so where their problems do occur, you find it quickly and early and able to make corrective actions and such, is fundamental to the success if you're going to engage in this concept of called foreign assistance. And one of the tragedies, I believe, in the dismantling of USAID is all that capacity is gone. Gone in the sense that it is no longer part of the U.S. government. There's many there. And I'll highlight, most people probably don't realize it, but our U.S. aid present in a country was generally 3/4 to 4/5 local hired people from the country, experts, top of the line, people doing everything from drivers to financial analysts to technical experts. Many of those people, not many, I know of a number of people who worked for USAID that later became ministers in their own countries, that became leaders in their own countries. The cream of the crop, I mean, just the very, very, very best of the country. And that was the vast majority of the people that worked at USAID. The Foreign Service Officer Corps, if you will, in 88 countries around the world, we had less than 2,000 people at our maximum size. Less than 2,000. We did hire, obviously, a lot of our work was done through contractors and U.S. contractors and grantees, and they had their own personnel and such, but generally they relied predominantly on local personnel. So one of the real tragedies is when we cut off everything one day, all of those people lost their jobs. And the impact on the economy is pretty intense, and on those individuals' lives, and of course, obviously, how they feel about the United States right now, which is not a great thing. It's truly astounding how much damage we did in such a short period of time to so many people. And again, those were the people that were directly trying to implement our foreign assistance. The actual beneficiaries is a whole nother story, and it's huge. Now, I will highlight that this administration has continued a significant amount of life-saving activities, particularly in the HIV and AIDS work area and in the malaria work area, where they're continuing to provide resources for personnel that have been paid for in the past by USAID. We're also still working through all of our programming through CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and they did about somewhere between 40 and 50% of our HIV and AIDS work in the African countries. That all largely continues. Other agencies that do foreign assistance, some of them are continuing in some ways. Millennium Challenge Corporation being the case example that I know a little bit about. In Malawi, their work was halted completely. But in a country like Zambia, where I spent I spent the first 6 months of this year, and they've shifted everything to basically extractive industry, building of roads and a rail line to get key minerals out of the country into the port to serve our interest. We've shifted over to a purely transactional, in my description, relationship in the foreign assistance space, where we do it if it benefits us being the United States or corporations closely allied with the administration. And I think more probably the latter. It certainly seems to me at this stage of the game. Ignoring completely what Congress has dictated the funding that was allocated for foreign assistance should go to, because Congress, all of our foreign assistance funding was what we call earmarked. It was Congress told us exactly the areas that we would be working in and how much in each of those areas. And the vast majority of it went into health programming. The vast majority of that went into HIV and AIDS, and largely because of strong constituencies in the United States that wanted to ensure that we were addressing that horrible pandemic, global pandemic, and obviously in our own interest to ensure that the pandemic around HIV and AIDS, which was in the general population and transmitted through sexual intercourse, would not spread to other parts of the world as was a real concern. So in any case, I finished up my service with USAID in 2020. I retired, and in the context of USAID or Foreign Service generally, you have a mandatory retirement at 65. I was asked to come back by USAID in a part-time role, basically as an assignment and career counselor for the senior leadership group for people who basically supporting the mission directors and deputy mission directors around the world in a number of different ways, kind of like what you're doing in the coaching space. But we had our own coaches, but we were the interface to help them figure out where they might best position themselves for their next assignments and when there are problems within the work that they were doing. I did that for 3 years on a part-time basis. The part-time kind of grew and grew, and my wife was like, yeah, you're working too hard. So in about a little over a year ago, I stopped working as assignment career counselor and moved back to the General Counsel's office to reclaim my title as a regional legal advisor. Now they're called resident legal officers. And basically provide service on an intermittent basis when folks either needed a break, were on maternity leave, or were in between assignments and they needed some coverage. And great opportunity for me because I'd actually had the opportunity to go back out into the field and spend time in the missions and support teams that I love very much and be back in the game, but on a very part-time basis. So on January 8th of this year, I started a short-term assignment in Zambia, covering for the resident legal officer in Lusaka. And it was intended to be a 7-week assignment. And a week after I got there, this administration was sworn in. And the day after that, the ambassador told the USAID mission director, with whom he had some conflict over the course of the prior year, that his services were no longer necessary, and I was asked to step up as the acting mission director in Zambia. And from that position, I witnessed and supported the dismantling of USAID in Zambia and in Malawi, because my responsibilities as a legal officer was for both Zambia and Malawi. And it was stark. It was
heartbreaking.
It was deeply heartbreaking, and it was, as I think all of the Foreign Service officers and really all of the officers at USAID, while it was gut-wrenching and painful and difficult, our focus immediately went to how can we end well? How can we wind up the programming that we have in a manner that is as responsible and to both the U.S. taxpayers, but also to our counterparts as we possibly could? And how can we document what was being lost in a manner that in the future, when the time comes that this whole affair is reviewed and audited and analyzed, that the truth can actually come out, that the record will be there. And I spent what was supposed to be a 7-week time period serving as a regional legal officer. I ended up staying through till the 1st of June. And like I said, witnessed the whole thing, provided advice, guidance, support, encouragement, some direction, but not easy. They certainly did not make it easy. Initially, we were told we were not supposed to speak to anybody, including our State Department colleagues. I'm like, what? It doesn't make any sense. Then it was okay to talk to our State Department colleagues, but not anybody else. It's like, well, the government's calling and asking what's going on here. We have people that are dying. We have medicines that are in transit that need to be delivered. we have to talk to people, and, made choices as to what we, how we could operate within what was unrealistic and ill-informed direction from Washington, working very closely with the ambassador to try to execute what we've been told to execute in a responsible manner. And again, trying to preserve what we could from a relationship standpoint, and also our resources, that we weren't completely wasting everything that was already in process. And it was a very difficult process, I will say.
I imagine, and I'm so sorry to because this is the heart of it. This is the devastation, which I think a lot of us who weren't there, who weren't in the position, had no idea really what were the real numbers, how was it really impacting people. I just appreciate you getting to the heart of it, and I just want to just go to one little statistic. I'm usually like stay with the heart, but just because it's such a great irony, and then we'll have enough time for you to give us a sort of to kind of wrap up closing thoughts, because suddenly we only have 5 minutes left. But just the great irony that you were so your particular role, and that it was institutionalized, the accountability piece was so stringent and so strong. The great and what was it, less I thought it was less than 1%, but I read an article to say that it was 0.04% of the
but it's a rounding error. I mean, come on.
ridiculous minimal amount to even consider a waste of US tax dollars, when it, as you made very clear earlier on, that it also, in case you're an American who thinks, why are we spending our money there? Which I think most Americans are empathetic, as you said, weren't necessarily thinking that way, but just it's good information and education for all of us to be reminded, helping people and having empathy matters, not from a condescending white supremacy way, but in a actually making sure people get food and medicine and assistance because they need it, and because we have it, and because we can do it. So I just wanted to just point out the irony that and the lack of empathy from that administration that made this cut and made this decision, and how and you're illustrating the devastation.
Indeed, and I again, we're at a moment in time, and this administration will have its life, and I think most of those of us who are involved in foreign assistance are already looking forward to what may be possible in the future. There are entities that have formed that are looking at the future of foreign assistance, and USAID still exists as a legal entity, and that hasn't changed. In fact, our chief of OMB is now considered the administrator, which I think is a bit of a travesty, considering he has no earthly idea as to anything to do with foreign assistance. And I won't even go into the whole Doge and Elon Musk and the amount of misrepresentation with regards to our foreign assistance. And I will highlight the fact that after all this characterization of waste, fraud, and abuse that was supposedly involved with our foreign assistance, not anyone has come forward with any examples of that actually being documented. None, zero. And there are some elements there. Of course, anything is going to have some issues, but I mean, it was an exception, a very, very small exception to the rule. The work that we did, I think most Americans would be extraordinarily proud of, and I think it's a travesty, a deep travesty that we are in where we are. That said, I think there are many already thinking about what does it look like next. Wonderful organization called Aid on the Hill has formed over the course of the last few months. And they had Andrew Natsios, who was a former administrator, Republican, strong leader from Massachusetts, Republican leader, talking about what it should look like going forward. There's other activities. A friend of mine just sent me a draft act to reconstitute foreign assistance. People are definitely working on this, no question about it. I think it's a little early, to be honest with you. We need to get through the midterms and see a the beginnings of a change in the power dynamics in Washington before we can really entertain what things might look next. And I think in that time, the real tragedy is the incredible expertise that is just drifting out and doing other things now, or just unemployed, or engaged in different things. Some people are getting positions with foundations and with UN entities and other bilateral donors like the Germans and the British and such. But as a large measure, folks are still kind of in shock. It was such a debilitating reality. But in any case, I look forward. I do think there will be foreign assistance on the part of the U.S. government that's not strictly transactional and American first oriented. I think that will come. But it'll be a little while, and we're going to have some good people, younger people than me, that come to the table together with others outside of this country who are beneficiaries of our foreign assistance to really help design what comes next. We're the richest country in the world. We've got incredible assets and resources that I think anyone in good conscience will want to share for the betterment of the world. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Bahi. It's been a delight to be with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing the personal impact as well as like the professional information and education. And yeah, many are grieving on so many different levels, and yet you hold hope. And I really appreciate you sharing that as well.
Well,
thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. It's really been a pleasure.
Well, it's great to have you. I also want to thank our listeners and viewers, and our engineer Rebel, and our producer Dean. And please remember to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time to It's Your Voice on Talk4TV or W4CY.com. And may we all have more educational, informational, enriching conversations on diversity this week. Thanks again.